Graham and Millicent Walker, here are the headlines. 3 people killed following a drone attack on an airbase in southern Russia. Dozens of Rohingya refugees survived a month at sea, arriving hungry and weak at a beach in western Indonesia. Plus, at least 38 people dead due to Arctic freeze in the United States and in Canada. A warm welcome again. We begin with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where the Russian government has reported a Ukrainian drone attack on an airbase for bombers in southern Russia, leaving 3 people dead. The Defense Ministry says air defense shot down the drone near the Engels base, but falling debris fatally wounded 3 technical staff. The base lies about 500 kilometers northeast of Ukraine's border. The Ukrainian military has not officially admitted carrying out the latest attack, but Air Force spokesman Yuri Ihnat said the explosions were the result of what Russia was doing on Ukrainian soil. The latest incident will come as an embarrassment to Russian authorities, coming so soon after the 2 5th of December attacks, hundreds of kilometers from the front line, both at the base and in the Ryazan region. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, together with the National Guard of Ukraine, conducted military drills in undisclosed locations, which military said was near the border with Belarus. Video released on Saturday by press service of Ukraine's armed forces showed Ukrainian servicemen training to prevent attack from tactical airborne troops on the critical state facilities. Belarus has in recent weeks announced a flurry of military activity, including readiness checks and a fresh deployment of Russian troops to the country. The maneuvers prompted suggestions from Ukrainian officials that Russia may be planning a fresh attack on Ukraine via Belarusian territory, as it did unsuccessfully in the early days of its war in Ukraine. Now, earlier today, the Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted a summit of the post-Soviet Commonwealth of Independent States in St. Petersburg. Billed as informal, the gathering is an end-of-year meeting often hosted by Russia. In his opening remarks, President Putin expressed his gratitude to attendees for accepting his invitation and for coming to St. Petersburg for what he said was a traditional, informal pre-New Year meeting of the CIS heads of states participants. The CIS was formed following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and grouped all 15 former Soviet republics, except the 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which never joined. Georgia left the grouping in 2009 over its 2008 war with Russia, and Ukraine pulled out in 2014 following Russia's annexation of Crimea. On Sunday, the Russian president said his country's offensive in Ukraine is being carried out to unite the Russian people. In an interview aired in Russia today, he said Russia's geopolitical opponents were aiming to tear apart Russia, the historical Russia. It comes as Russia today carried out more attacks on Ukraine.
The multiple explosions and constant shelling were heard in Ukraine's Bakhmut, an eastern city that has become the target of Russian attempts to advance in recent weeks in fighting that has killed thousands of soldiers. Wrecked apartment blocks, fire and thick gray smoke rising over residential areas were seen in the city, all signs of the nearly 5-month battle for Bakhmut. In his evening address on Sunday, President Zelensky said Moscow is aiming to make the rest of 2022 dark and difficult for Ukraine, adding that I know that darkness will not prevent us from bringing the invaders to their new defeats, but we must be ready for any scenario. His statement comes on the same day the Russian President Vladimir Putin said he was ready to negotiate with all parties involved in the war in Ukraine, although he said Kiev and its Western backers have refused to engage in talks. On Saturday, the Kherson Regional State Administration released a video on social media showing burnt cars, bodies, blood on the ground, and damaged buildings in the recaptured city. 7 people had died in the attack and 58 others wounded. The attack was said to have come from a Grad multiple rocket launcher. Residents in the city of Kramatorsk have nothing but anger and hatred against the Russians as they walk through what used to be a residential building, now damaged by the Russian strike. And for those in Bakhmut, they are merely surviving, grateful they live another day, but fearful any day could be their last.
Let's talk some more about the situation in Ukraine. Joining us now is Anna Chernikova. Anna, it's good to see you. Talk to us about today in Ukraine. I mean, in other parts of the world, it's celebrations, but give us a sense of, the atmosphere there today.
Good evening. Well, it's definitely a very special Christmas for Ukraine, and very, different Christmas from previous years. A lot of Ukrainians were not celebrating it, not at home. Some Ukrainians were celebrating at the front line. But I should say that this was the first year that Ukrainian church has officially had a church service on the 25th of December. So millions of Ukrainians actually celebrated Christmas this past weekend, as previously, Ukrainians were celebrating at the beginning of January, and this was so this was for the first time, and a lot of people actually encourage church to make this transition of the calendar. A lot of people don't want to celebrate and to have any cultural and traditional similarities with Russia, of course, but this change of church calendar is a discussion within the Ukrainian society for years now. So this year it was kind of a turning point due to this full-scale invasion. And actually, this, as I already said, this Christmas was very special. So Ukrainians joined the rest of Europe, the rest of the world, with celebrating on the 25th of December. I cannot say that you can really feel much, Christmas mood, because, of course, the war is definitely prevailing, and the war is definitely taking over all the emotions and all the, mood senses. But of course, people are trying to create at least, some Christmas mood and happy mood in their homes, in the restaurants, in the cafeterias, in the stores. You can see decorations. So definitely Ukrainians, wanted to keep this tradition. And also Ukrainian soldiers, a lot of them had also this, Christmas celebration, even though they were at point zero at the front line. But we've seen photos and videos from soldiers celebrating. So definitely traditions were present this year. However, of course, it was very special and different Christmas.
And Anna, many also wonder to some of those areas that were so-called, well, Russia says, it was annexed, to it. Many wonder how celebrations also went on there. But also another question is, have there been any more attacks since yesterday?
Well, unfortunately, it was an attack, a very bad attack over the weekend on the city of Kherson and the city center. So basically, Christmas started tragically for the city of Kherson. For the moment, we know about, confirmed number is 68 wounded and 10 dead. All those are the civilians. Russian forces used artillery system Grad to shell the central part of the city, damaging residential areas and damaging hospitals in the city of Kherson. A lot of Ukrainian authorities encourage people to who have this opportunity and who are ready, let's say, to evacuate from Kherson for certain time before it becomes more safe, because Russian forces are just on the other side of the river, and Kherson is reachable with artillery systems. So, and especially those people who are living next to the river of Dnipro, they are encouraged actually to evacuate. However, and the government created this possibility, this evacuation procedure for those who want. But in general, I think this was the most tragic part of this past weekend. Ukraine experienced massive air raid siren twice yesterday as well. However, no attacks were happening massively. We only know about attacks in the Donetsk region, in Kherson region. These attacks are happening constantly, almost nonstop. And of course, we should not forget about Bakhmut. Bakhmut is one of the hottest spots for the moment at the front line, and very, very heavy battles are happening there. And Ukrainian forces managed to keep their positions, not letting Russian forces to proceed and to advance. This was confirmed by the General Staff of Ukraine. So I guess this is the main. This is basically these are two main directions we should look at this point of time: Kherson region, and Bakhmut.
Ukraine is yet to comment on the drone strike at the Russian airbase. Has there been any change to the status quo?
Well, we don't have any official confirmations or official announcements, statements from Ukrainian authorities regarding these attacks. We've heard from one of the representatives of the Ukrainian armed forces, Mr. Ignat, that this is basically, well, Russia is getting the answer for what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but it was not a direct, confirmation that Ukraine, had something to do with this attack. But of course, we all understand that this was not accidentally an accident, and we all understand, and we all can see and can follow all these reports about more and more attacks that are happening deep into Russia, and all of them are basically targeting military infrastructure, military air bases, and storages. And we hear a lot about new fires, new explosions. So definitely, I guess this is a consequence of Russia's actions in Ukraine. But again, we don't have official confirmations.
Now, we heard in his evening address on Sunday, President Zelensky said the country must be ready for any scenario. And it was also the same day that Russian President Vladimir Putin said he was ready to negotiate with all parties involved. But then he said that Kyiv and the Western backers are not interested in any kind of talks. Would you say that is the case for Kyiv?
Well, from what we know, for now, Russia do not ready to negotiate on the basis of equal negotiations. So Russia wants to negotiate their points, and only their points. They have certain views and certain suggestions of how they see these negotiations, but definitely this is not something that would be relevant for Ukraine, as the Ukrainian president already mentioned and also announced during his visit to Washington and during his press conference with President Biden, that Ukraine has. So basically, there is this Kyiv peace plan, and this is what Ukraine is ready to negotiate with both with its European partners and with Russia when Russia is ready. So, according to Ukrainian officials as well as U.S. officials and some of the also European officials, Russia yet is not ready to negotiate terms that are not led by them. So Russia is not only ready to negotiate their own terms. And this is what President Zelensky already mentioned a couple of times, not what Ukraine is interested in. And this is not what's going to lead to long-term peace, because Ukraine is interested only in long-term peace. And for the moment, Ukrainian officials see this, and Ukrainian society actually see this long-term peace only with victory. And this is basically, I guess, what makes these negotiations impossible, because Russia definitely is not ready to accept that. and Ukraine sees a long-term peace with getting all its territory back, including Donbas and Crimea. So this is definitely something that if to be negotiated one day, probably not what could be negotiated at this point of time. So I don't think that. Of course, Russian side would put it the way they want it to be, seen. But according to what we hear from U.S. partners, from European partners, the main negotiation is happening at the battlefield.
And Anna, it's only a few days to the end of 2022. What expectations do Ukrainians have for the new year?
Well, definitely Ukrainians want peace, and Ukrainians see this peace only through the victory. So Ukrainians want victory. And definitely this is something that Ukrainian society is ready for. They're ready to fight until this very victory is happening. And Ukrainian society is ready to go through difficulties like energy difficulties, electricity difficulties, battlefield difficulties. But definitely this is the only way, as what Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian society see as a long-term peace, and as we already discussed. So I guess this 2023, the main and only wish that the main wish, let's put it this way, the main wish that Ukrainians would have is peace and the victory, because this is something that could not be without each other.
Anna Chernikova, VOA's correspondent, joining us from Kyiv. Thanks a lot, and try to enjoy your holiday.
Thank you.
Coming up on the program, at least 38 deaths have now been linked to a severe Arctic freeze that continues to pummel the US and Canada. Stay with us. Welcome back. South Korea's military officials say the North has flown 5 drones across their mutual border. The country's Joint Chiefs of Staff says unmanned aerial vehicles violated South Korea's airspace and the border areas around Gyeonggi province. One drone flew all the way to the northern edge of the capital, Seoul, before returning across the border. Jets and attack helicopters were deployed, but 100 rounds fired from helicopters failed to shoot them down. A South Korean military official said they had since lost track of all the drones, but that they were no longer in flight. Staying in Asia, Christmas Day was spent helping to evacuate children and infants from their homes after flash floods hit Jingguog city. Children and infants were carried across waist-deep water while residents salvaged some of their belongings from their submerged homes during a Philippine Red Cross organized search and rescue operation. In its latest bulletin today, the National Disaster Agency reported 8 casualties, 5 of whom died while drowning, while 19 were missing. Of the 8 deaths, 6 were in the mountainous and coastal Misanese Occidental province. Data from the Social Welfare Ministry showed nearly 46,000 people were sheltering in evacuation centers.
Suki kontil, alay sa Pilipin. Alay sa matabil. Uy, ginuho ko, bata gamay. Uy, ginuho ko, jundi. Uy, ata, nasa kayo, ginupya ko niya anak ko.
gravity of the situation in the Philippines. In another development, dozens of Rohingya refugees survived a month out at sea before being drifted onto a beach in western Indonesia, hungry and weak. It is not clear if they are part of a group of at least 150 Rohingya who became stranded at sea weeks ago. The Rohingya are a persecuted ethnic minority in the original home, Myanmar, Burma. The wooden boat with 57 men on board landed Sunday morning in Aceh province. The men have been taken to hospital for treatment. It was not immediately known where the migrants had sailed from, though many live in refugee camps in Bangladesh, about 1,200 miles away. And in China, emergency wards are at capacity, with even ill staff working as the country continues to deal with rising COVID-19 infections. COVID-19 patients with low oxygen levels have been flooding in, becoming the daily struggles endured by staff at a major Beijing hospital. China's healthcare system has been under enormous strain since the country's recent scrapping of its zero COVID policy, with staff being asked to work while sick and retired medical workers in rural communities being rehired to help. This according to state media. Cities across China have been racing to add intensive care units, fever clinics and facilities designed to prevent the wider spread of contagious disease in hospitals. According to state media, the Beijing municipal government has increased the number of fever clinics in the city from 94 to almost 1,300. Shanghai has 2,600 such clinics and has transferred doctors from less trained medical departments to help out.
就是不足的，好多同事都在这个带病的建设工作。
Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies in China are working at full steam to ensure ample anti-epidemic medical supply as the country continues to optimize COVID-19 epidemic prevention and also control measures. After China rolled out 10 new prevention and control measures in the COVID-19 response on December the 7th, the market demands for antigen reagents as well as fever-reducing and cough-relieving medicines, which have been rapidly expanding amid surging COVID infections. In response, a pharmaceutical company in the district east of China's Fujian province has been working around the clock to ramp up production of antigen reagents to meet the growing market demand. At present, the company's production capacity of antigen test kits has hit 4 million units per day. Now, one vlogger from the United States is finding lots of content documenting how life is returning to normal in the Wuhan province. China began lifting restrictions weeks ago following protests against lockdowns after 10 people were killed in a fire at an apartment in Urumqi.
One of the biggest changes that you first notice is that many of the COVID testing booths, much like the one here behind me, are now empty and even being taken away, which is huge because compared to a month ago, we were still required to show a negative 48-hour test in order to go into public transportation, public places, and even work in school. Without having to prove that we have completed the negative 48-hour test, these booths are no longer necessary. So we are here at one of Wuhan's busiest subway stations, and with many workplaces opening up and shops and malls no longer under lockdown restriction, the subway definitely feels a lot busier than it was just a few weeks prior. Of course, people are still required to wear masks, but the resumption of work has a lot of people very excited as we see the economy resuming. Okay, so now as you can see, most restaurants are now open and running. Most people, although worried about catching the virus, seem relieved about the loosening of the restrictions, and there's a renewed feeling of hope and security with the resumption of normal life.
And it has been a really snow-white Christmas in the United States, where storms have characterized the holiday. However, a deadly blizzard paralyzed Buffalo, New York on Christmas Day, trapping motorists and their cars, knocking out electricity to thousands of homes and raising the death toll from a severe winter storm system that has chilled the U.S. for days. U.S. media reports that at least 30 people have died in U.S. weather-related incidents since a deep freeze extended its grip grip over most of the nation, coupled with snow, ice, and howling winds from a storm that roared out the Great Lakes region last week. Much of the tour has centered in and around Buffalo at the edge of Lake Erie in western New York, where a driving ban remained in effect as heavy lake effect snow, the result of cold air moving over warmer lake waters, and numbing cold continued through the holiday weekend. New York Governor Kathy Hochul told reporters on Sunday that the Biden administration had agreed to support her request for a federal disaster declaration. She said some 200 National Guard troops were mobilized in western New York, providing relief to police and fire crews, conducting wellness checks and bringing supplies to shelters, with more on the way.
We had announced 3 total deaths. We can confirm 4 more deaths for a total of 7. 4 were confirmed during the overnight hours. I don't have the exact total of how they were found. I do know that some were found in cars and some were found actually on the street in snowbanks. I offer my deepest condolences to the families, some of whom probably have not actually been notified yet. But we do have 7 confirmed deaths at this point as a result of the storm in Erie County. There may be more. I don't want to say that this is going to be it, because it would be fallacy for me to say that, because we know there are people who've been stuck in cars for more than 2 days, and there are people in homes that are below freezing now temperatures. So the driving ban is still in effect. It may look great where you are, but I know there's a lot of people who are realizing that they're not going anywhere because of the conditions and basically 48 hours of straight snow.
Well, staying with that situation, a lot of people also found it hard getting from place to place in New York as a blizzard blanketed parts of New York State and trapped hundreds of motorists, with the National Guard troops called in to help with rescues complicated by whiteout conditions and drifting snow. Drone footage shows stationary trucks and cars forming long queues on ice and snow-covered highways. Multiple vehicles were also seen buried in snow, with motorists struggling to tow them through unplowed streets. Let's hear more from the New York Governor, Kathy, on the situation in the state.
The National Guard is here. Lastly, I'll say I've been in contact with the White House. Just spoke in the last hour with Ron Klain, the Chief of Staff to President Biden. He has assured me that within a very short time of them receiving our request for a disaster declaration, it will be granted. And that is good news for us to be able to start covering the cost of this epic, once-in-a-lifetime storm that we're now having to deal with. So that is an update from the White House. The president is very concerned about this. He said, whatever you need from the White House, we will be there for you, and I'm grateful to President Biden for that support as well. Said we do have 94.5% of Erie County residents have their power on. That is a good thing. And about 87% of Buffalonians in the city now have their power restored.
Secondly, given the seriousness
Well, the Arctic freeze has been doing some things in the state of Texas. If we take a look at the icicles spotted hanging from the roof of a car crash on Christmas Eve, this was following the storms. It shows that it was sent in by someone who was just passing the car wash in the Lakeway U.S. Utilities, where they were working to restore power after the storm moved on from their service territories, but some were still dealing with high winds. The greatest number of outages have been in the New England region, with 156,289 customers without power in Maine, followed by New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. It's a major situation there. Well, let's head to South Africa, where families have been picking up the pieces following a tanker gas explosion on Saturday that claimed 15 lives. One family reportedly lost 4 children in the explosion. Police have, however, arrested the driver of the tanker, and he faces multiple counts of homicide, negligence, and is expected to appear in court December 28. Earlier, my colleague Amarachi Ubani spoke with our bureau chief in South Africa, Betty Dibia, on developments so far.
Few hours after it happened, you said it all. Basically, the driver was coming from KwaZulu-Natal, Richards Bay, carrying LPG gas to Botswana, and he drove through, for some flyovers or for some bridges, you have the height limit. So he got stuck in there, and there was fire. The fire service came to try to pull it out. Probably the friction now sparked some, it caused that explosion. And many of those who were affected, 15 people confirmed dead. There could be more. Their homes, 2 homes, according to Gift of the Givers, were affected. But structural damage to those buildings are not as much as you have for the bridge, which was totally destroyed. Some people, many of those affected were bystanders, those seeing fire. I don't know why anybody would do that. Those seeing fire and going towards the fire. So that explosion, as you're seeing in the visuals, but now happened. And many people, there's a second clip that I sent along with that, where the clothes were blown off the bodies of the people. People were burnt, and then the hospital, the Tambo Memorial, is not far from that area as well. That's why you have the injured patients who were affected at that hospital. Some have been taking away structural damage at the hospital section. There's some extent of damage. The minister has gone there along with the premier of Gauteng province, Panyaza Lesufi, and other party leaders have all gone to see the extent of damage. But there's a lot that still that will have to be fixed, as well as that bridge. The area is more or less, Ekurhuleni is an industrial area. It's not too far from the OR Tambo International Airport, which is in Ekurhuleni, by the way. And then the lives. It's really unfortunate. The first person we spoke to there, I couldn't use his interview because he was talking about that scene of the incident, really a bad picture. And there were people running around naked with high degree burns all over their bodies. So it's really a bad picture. And unfortunately, on there's no day would have been good, but unfortunately on Christmas Eve, a really sad story. Hospital is still standing. It's not a small hospital. It's not a very big hospital. It's not a small hospital. There is an extent of structural damage. The officials went in. We were not really allowed to go in there with them, but the officials went in there, so we got to see some of the extent, like the roof. Just the intensity of that explosion is what sort of went on to that hospital, which is not far from the area of the incident. So hospital is still standing. A lot will still need to be fixed at the hospital. And those are, 37 people injured, 24 of them are patients, and then staff members, about 13, as you had said earlier. So a part of the hospital was affected. You had the charity organization Gift of the Givers supplying ambulance. Fire trucks were burned in that explosion as well, and some other vehicles. So the charity organizations trying to help or to support all that's being done. But structurally, there's a lot that will need to be fixed at that hospital, and some of the homes affected in the area. It may have been worse if it wasn't Christmas Eve, because a lot of movement away from Gauteng province usually happens. But thankfully, the casualty figures is lower than it could have been, because that's an industrial area and quite populated. A lot of ministers are saying a lot of things. that will happen in due course. I think for now, they're trying to secure lives. But the gas you're talking about is LPG. I mean, we inhale LPG more or less if we cook at home. The owners, insurance will have to be involved. I'm sure that will come in due course. But speaking about the workers that have been affected, we heard the Minister for Employment and Labour, Tulas Nesi, talking about supporting them through the compensation fund. And the UIF, I'm not quite sure what UIF stands for. It's another fund to support workers who lose their livelihood, a means of livelihood. So those will be supported. And those homes affected, I'm sure they will be supported or compensated one way or another when the processes go on. But for now, I think it's the safety of people, the health, and those who have been affected to just secure that they get the right medical attention at this point. That's what's topmost. But I believe that, and then you have the Economic Freedom Fighters, one of the opposition parties, who visited today, and they're talking about calling an emergency meeting of the Council of Ekurhuleni as soon as possible. They're in recess now and should have been resuming by the 26th of January. But they're calling for that so that they will work out things like what you just asked me about, how to help those or support those who have been affected in this incident. There's supposed to be a process, depending on what your cargo is, the safety measures, alerting the fire service chief of the area you're passing through. I'm not quite sure he's familiar with that route. If he was, he would know the height limit for his truck. Remember, the truck, you have cars going over the bridge, but under the bridge is a tunnel-like passage. So that's where he got stuck because his truck had reached the limit and wasn't. So if it's someone who is used to that route, I don't think he would have taken that particular bridge. So we'll get to hear his reasons by the 28th when he's appearing at the Boksburg Magistrates Court to know the reason why, or maybe he's not even South African. So we're not yet sure of a number of facts. But there's a call for by some of these politicians again saying, look, I think we need to take seriously carrying things like this via the rail route. Ensure that rail infrastructure or freight for things like this, which is a danger to the society if anything goes wrong. We need to take things like that seriously. But what has happened has happened. Hopefully lessons will be taken and notes as well taken on how to avoid things like this, because it could have been avoided.
The update on that situation with the tanker explosion in South Africa. We go on a break now. When we return, it's time for the famous traditional Christmas Day dip in Germany. We'll tell you all about it in a moment. We continue in North Africa, where an aid group in Sudan has reported ethnic violence in the country's troubled western region that has left 12 people dead. The clashes between herdsmen and farmers in the Balil area in South Darfur province has also injured at least 42 people. Local authorities say the clashes grew out of an attempt by herdsmen to loot a motorized rickshaw known as a tuk-tuk in the village of Almori, killing one person. The fighting escalated when herdsmen and the local population traded attacks. Authorities then declared a state of emergency and imposed a nighttime curfew in Balil to help stop the clashes. Spokesman for the General Coordination for Refugees and Displaced in Darfur, Adam Riggle, says the aid group counted 12 dead in the fighting and the tally could be higher. He said many villages in the area were either burned down or looted. Hundreds of families were displaced and took shelter in Nyala, the provincial capital of South Darfur. The violence was the latest to rock Darfur in recent months. In November, at least 48 people were killed in the tribal clashes in central Darfur province. And Sunday was Christmas Day around the world. Well, at least in most parts, Christmas Day marks the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of the Christian faith, and many mark the day with Christmas services and local traditions. One of the most prominent messages on Sunday came from the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, who described the world as suffering from a famine of peace. And as he has come to be known to do, advocated for the people of Ukraine. Here's a look at some global celebrations.
On Christmas morning, Christian worshippers packed a morning mass service in the West Bank town of Bethlehem, revered as the traditional birthplace of Jesus. A crowd gathered at Bethlehem's manger square to greet Pizzaballa and watch magic. And in the Vatican, Pope Francis, in his Christmas Day message, called for an end to the war in Ukraine and other conflicts, saying the world was suffering from a famine of peace. He also urged people to look beyond the shallow holiday glitter and help the homeless, immigrants, refugees, and the poor in their midst, seeking comfort, warmth, and food.
Che sia Natale, il Natale di Gesù e della pace, guardiamo a Betlemme e fissiamo lo sguardo sul volto del bambino che è nato per noi. E in quel piccolo viso innocente riconosciamo quello dei bambini che in ogni parte del mondo anelano la pace.
In Ukraine, residents in folklore costumes sang Christmas carols inside a metro station in Kyiv during an air raid alarm. Coordinator of the Kyiv Kolyada community said this year they decided to meet in the underground to save carolers in case of an air raid. The country is 10 months into the so-called Russian military operation, and Ukraine's main Orthodox Church has broken with Moscow, facing the West, now celebrating Christmas on the 25th of December instead of in January, as it has always done. In the UK, King Charles III delivered his first ever Christmas message, paying tribute to his late mother, the Queen. Echoing words in her last Christmas message, where she spoke of her grief at losing her husband, Prince Philip, recalling that Christmas was a particularly poignant time for all of us who have lost loved ones.
I'm standing here in this exquisite chapel of St. George at Windsor Castle, so close to where my beloved mother, the late Queen, is laid to rest with my dear father. I am reminded of the deeply touching letters, cards, and messages which so many of you have sent my wife and myself. And I cannot thank you enough for the love and sympathy you have shown our whole family.
And while North America celebrated under the cold winter storm, locals and tourists flocked to Bondi Beach for the Australian tradition of celebrating Christmas in the sun.
Meanwhile, the rising cost of living, which is evident in the prices of food items, transport and even gifts, may have dampened the excitement of festivities here in Nigeria. This is one of the observations made after our business correspondent, Laddie Williams, spent a couple of hours with the Oyewole family in Lagos, southwest Nigeria.
Hello. It's Christmas, a jolly season, a time to give gifts and enjoy time with family, and the Oyewoles were gracious enough to let me into their home to get a feel of how the average family feels about Christmas this year with sky-high inflation.
Quite an incredible season, and it'd be nice to visit beautiful families like
2022 was a tough year for businesses in Nigeria, and I spoke with Mr. Oluwaseun Oyewole, a serial entrepreneur and CEO at Aaron.ng, a logistics company in Lagos, about how his business fared this year.
we reduce our staff strength, staff capacity by all standard. I think it's about 30%, from what it was in 2021. We reduce our staff strength, and just to be able to cope with the reality of things, we couldn't reduce, we couldn't do a pay cut, because already, what the staff were earning, or what they were earning in 2021, is not even enough, to cope with the high inflation rates, in the current year.
With rising food prices in Nigeria, Mr. Oyewole talked about home budgeting, as Mrs. Oyewole was unavoidably absent.
On family front, we also have, things, we made some adjustments, tough ones, but then, especially in terms of grocery, I thank God I have a wife who is pretty understanding, and then who could actually, manage things.
Apparently, the kids are good at playing chess, so I got them to teach me a few moves, and they told me how they are spending their Christmas.
Last Christmas was fun for me because I had just come out of secondary school, so I was very happy. But this year was really stressful for me, so I'm not really as happy as I was last.
As 2022 winds down, it is hoped that businesses and households have it easier in 2023, and we can truly have a white Christmas.
And finally, around 24 hardened German swimmers went for their traditional Christmas Day dip in a frozen Berlin lake. This was on Sunday, saying it was cold, but wonderful and even healthy. Unlike those who are already looking forward to a swim in one of Berlin's lakes on a warm summer day, the group known as the Berlin Seals meets at the Orankesee Lake on Sundays from mid-September until the end of April because they say they love cold water. Asked whether it was cold, a Berlin Seal, Anton, laughed and said, yes, it's called ice swimming. It's very cold with ice floes, but that it was a lot of fun, and saying that it's healthy. A handwritten sign nearby showed the water temperature at 2 degrees Celsius, 35 Fahrenheit, and that of the air as 4 degrees Celsius, 39 Fahrenheit. The Berlin Seals were founded in 1980 in what at the time was East Berlin, the capital of former East Germany. Many believe taking a cold dip not only gives you an adrenaline rush, it's also for good luck. But what do you think? That's our show today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. I'll see you again.